Hello, everybody, and welcome to tonight's live stream. So, tonight we're going to be talking about if you're doing a presentation, do you use recorded demos or do you use live demos? And I know this has been a subject that a lot of the community have talked about. So, I have my two friends and colleagues joining me tonight, Alexander and Chris. Welcome, guys. Thank you for being with me.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for inviting me back.
No worries. Just to introduce yourselves both to the audience, make sure everybody knows why we're all here. Alexander, do you want to give the audience a brief introduction to who you are and why you're here?
By all means. I'm not sure why I'm here. Well, I know why I'm here, but I'll save that for last. So I'm Alexander. I am from Sweden. I am a data platform MVP. I have 25 years working with IT. I'm getting old, and this is white, not because it's fashionable, because I'm getting old. I run the Swedish Power BI user group. I'm a weird one because I have one foot in the SQL Server community and one foot in the Power BI community, but it also gives me a somewhat different viewpoint I've found. I am a speaker trainer. I do a lot of presentations all over the world. Well, I used to before the world ended. I got stuck in my home office. It's a nice home office, but I'm kind of looking forward to getting out. Then again, I'm not entirely sure that I remember how to behave among people, but that's for, yeah, we'll see this summer. So the reason why I'm here is I have been known to say fairly categorically that live demos are a waste of time. It's not quite that easy, but I'm going to start with that viewpoint, and then we'll see where we end up. Because as we were talking about before the stream started, things get very, very nuanced very, very quickly.
Awesome. Chris, do you want to introduce yourself as well, please?
Absolutely. Thanks, Sarah. So Chris Reddington, by day, I'm a cloud solution architect at Microsoft, but by evening, like Sarah, like Alexander, do a lot of work in the community as well. So I'm the organizer of Azure Thames Valley here in the UK. Also run my own podcast, vlog, blog, mix of platforms, Cloud with Chris, and I do a lot of demos and presentations myself, whether that's for work purposes or whether that's the community side as well. And I guess I sit on the side of the fence where I actually enjoy the thrill of doing live demos. And I say thrill because it can be quite energizing when things don't quite go according to plan. I'm sure we've been there. I'm sure it will come up as we go through the discussion as well. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to learning from you both and just seeing where the discussion takes us, because I think there's definitely a sliding scale, as you say, Alexander. So let's see where we go.
Awesome. Awesome. Now, I probably admit that I use a lot of recorded demos. You will see me use a lot of videos and a lot of recorded demos, and especially now in this virtual world. I did do a live demo a few months ago, which was an interesting experience and a bit stressful, but hey ho, you've got to grow yourself. So tonight we will be discussing this and talking about the nuances of it. So we definitely want your comments, your experiences, your questions. So please do hit us up in the chat. We will be viewing that. So I see we've got John in the chat. So thank you for joining us. Now, demos are something that we have to have in presentations, especially if we're talking about technology, right? There's no point killing everybody to death with PowerPoint and slides and chat. It's not fun, right? We've been through that ourselves, and demos always help to re-emphasize the point or help educate and show people what we've just actually been explaining, because everybody learns differently, right? So demos, recorded or live? Alexander, why do you love doing recorded demos? Why is that your stance in this subject?
So the funny thing is I'm going to backtrack even further and question the statement that demos are required. So I'll give a brief background on my view. So why do you do anything in a session? I have been teaching for many, many, many years, 20 odd years. So I strive to find the teaching point. What am I trying to convey? Which means that nothing is gained by showing off my absolutely zero skills in clicking around in the portal and speaking at the same time, because I cannot for the life of me do two things at the same time whenever I have one of these in my hand. So I don't even try. So again, in order to make a teaching point, I need to make sure that the small amount of time that I have is used in the best possible way. Working with the portal, working with basically anything, means that I suddenly have to figure out how to do zooming to make sure that everybody can see what I'm doing. Everything needs to be, well, basically fixed in a timeline and make sure that I'm not going off on a tangent. So that's why I prefer to, if I can, avoid the demo unless the demo is absolutely necessary to show a point. I might be able to teach the point without a demo, then I'll definitely do that. But if I have to use a demo, I much prefer recording it, because then I can do all these nifty tricks in post where I can zoom and point things out and take away all the time that just disappears whenever you try to do something live. So that's my statement to start with. Hit me.
So Chris, do you want to argue that? Do you want to take the opposite point there?
Yeah, sure. It was well invited as well. So I was actually reflecting on why I'm the stance that I am as you were speaking, because a lot of it hit home as you were speaking. And I think for me, the past 4 or 5 years, the role I was in before the role I'm in now, is all remote. So the way that I worked with organizations, worked with customers, was very much the way that we're in the world right now. I'm having calls with people. We'll be talking about various subject areas, and yeah, we can use docs, we can use PowerPoints, but there's only a certain level where that lands. Sometimes people like to go ahead and actually see things happening for real, see a real scenario unfolding. And sometimes you need to kind of go and take that step forward and go live and go hands-on. And I think that's where maybe I'm a little more comfortable than a lot of other people of just going along saying, okay, let's just jump in and see how things go here, because I'm used to rolling in that kind of way. And I think I'd just go back to that point, really, that PowerPoint and information is great. The other thing I reflect on is how people learn as well. I think we all know, right, there's different ways that all of us digest information, take things in. For me, I know that I'm 2 main areas, either video content, and I kind of listen, take things in, watch back, watch again, or I have to do something. So I think for me, that's why I prefer that live approach, because it feels like, oh, we're doing something here. So I'm kind of taking that in. And that's at least my stance anyway. I know we've got many scenarios here we're going to unfold, so it's going to be interesting.
Those are really great points. And the more I think of it, the more I realize that there are, in my view, basically 2 kinds of knowledge. One is specific technical knowledge that I can basically Google. Here we have, how do you do something with Synapse, for instance, or how do you do this or whatever. The other part is way harder to Google because you don't know what questions to ask. And then Google is absolutely useless. Ask me how I know. So I tend to do sessions based on the latter, because anybody can Google the former. But talking about concepts, that kind of makes specific demos slightly more abstract. So it might also be my choice of things to talk about that make demos slightly less obvious.
There's something interesting you said in there as well, which was about what you could go ahead and Google or search for or whatever there. And I think that's also why I sit on the side of the fence that I do, because if I were going to a presentation or a conference, maybe there'd be a bit of pressure, for example, in conference mode and doing things live. Maybe I'd change my stance here, but I guess haven't had to stand up in front of hundreds of people for a while. So maybe my stomach is telling me different at the moment. But I think for me, exactly that point, as you mentioned, if I could go ahead, Google it or search on YouTube and find a video on something where actually they already have the nice shiny demo of showing the thing. I've actually had it over the past week a couple of times, 3 times, I think, over various presentations I've done, where we've started on one path and then you get questions asked and you go, okay, let's just bin all of that stuff off. We'll forget about that fancy path of the demo that we had here. And we'll actually go and focus on that question because it's really interesting. And that's going to be way more valuable answering what you wanted rather than me doing this kind of pre-scripted, pre-planned stuff. So let's go down that path. And I think when you go down the recorded path, sure, you could open up the browser and start doing things and showing things there. But I feel it almost loses a bit of that connectivity to the story. And yeah, that's something that I particularly, as I say, enjoy about doing it. But whether when it comes back to live events and having hundreds of people in the audience, I'll still feel that way. Ask me then. I'm sure the opinion might change a little.
So they're all very valid points. I've actually got 3 questions here for you.
Mm.
So Ed Baker, well-known server guy, is in the chat saying that he does demos with live with backup recordings. And I know Ed does a lot of training. He's an MCT. I think he's a regional lead for the UK, or maybe larger than that. But that's obviously his tactic. So he does very much what you do as well, Alexander, in terms of the training things. It's an interesting point, though. If you're doing live, what happens when it doesn't work? What happens when, say, you are in a conference hall and the Wi-Fi isn't good enough to show the Azure portal, say, for example, which is obviously internet dependent? How do you handle that, Chris? Because
yeah,
I guess it's slightly different in a virtual world, because right now, if I lost my internet connection, like right now, I wouldn't be able to probably stream. So it wouldn't even be a case of I need a backup video because I can't even connect to the platform, right? So it's more in a live world, in a real world. Do you have backup demos for that kind of scenario, Chris? Or if something happens, so say we had an Azure portal outage during your session, what would you do there? Would you have recordings?
Yeah, so I probably have recordings buried away somewhere I could repurpose. But what I have in my PowerPoint slides is I have kind of screenshots of all the various stages of where I would show things. So rather than kind of having the recording and talking over the top of it, and I know there are folks that do that, and I think that's a really nice way of being able to recover in that kind of scenario. I kind of have more of a static approach, and then kind of click through almost and lands the points that I would have landed as I tell that story and tell that journey. But the reason I was smirking, actually, interestingly, is I've actually had the other way around. I've had the scenario where we were going to do a webinar and the session was pre-recorded, and we were going to go and do the pre-record, but the pre-record wouldn't work. And then the question, or rather, there was sound issues or something. And the question was, can you do this live? And it was like, had I known I could have done this live, or would have done this live, sure. But all of the stuff that I was going to demo is now deleted and gone. So not really. So I think it works both ways. I think having the pre-record and also being ready to go live if you need to in a really strange way are both good options to have, for sure.
So we've also got another question in the chat about the audience size, and it'll depend on if it's a small audience, you do like a live demo. Alexander's shaking his head, so I'm thinking he's dismissing that point completely.
No, well, so here's the deal. It comes back to what are you doing on stage? And I'm pretty sure that Ed will be in agreement with me here, because again, I'm coming from a teaching standpoint. I am trying to convey a point. I'm trying to teach a point. I am not there to take questions from the audience and basically go down a rabbit hole. Nothing wrong with that, but that's not why I'm there. I have a very specific goal in mind. I know exactly what I want to teach, and I know exactly how I want to teach it. That's why I will never have any questions while I'm speaking. I will have them at the end. I will never allow myself to go off on a tangent. Again, nothing wrong with that, but that's not the way I work. So that's why, for me, it is vital that I can control every minute of the presentation. I know what I'm saying, how I'm saying it, and basically I'm building this story up so I know what kind of questions I'm going to have at the end. So that's, for me, basically a railroaded session. Another thing that I might point out when it comes to working with the things we work with, if you turn your back on, say, for Power BI or Azure, or even worse, go on vacation, half the damn thing has changed when you come back. So that in itself is a reason for having a recorded demo, just saying.
Classic.
And I think,
how I know.
Where did that button go?
Yep. And I think you're making a valid point about the questions during a session. I think it's great when people, give a good question that potentially the whole audience wants, but sometimes there's going to be someone in the audience that is going to railroad you down a route of answering their very specific and very bespoke and very niche question that the rest of the 500 folk or whoever are sitting watching you are not interested in, and it makes it non-valuable for them in a sense. It's great for that one person who's getting their answer, their free consultancy or their free answer, but it derails you from your session timings. It can derail you from the objective of the session, and potentially again completely just throw you off, because I know a lot of us work towards timings. You know, we know that we have to be on slide 20 by the 10-minute mark because the sessions, you know, that's where we've timed it and stuff like that. And we have to hit the demo by this time mark. And if you get off that, you're completely lost. And I don't think it makes you a poor presenter if you've got that kind of timing right, because how many times have we had to shuffle off, or the stream has ended because, you know, that time has hit and it's just a, you know, goodbye, see you, you're not getting to finish it. And there's lots to think about there in terms of what you're doing and the session and the audience as well. I think I'm now rambling on about my point, but I think you all understand what I'm trying to say.
I think it's a really great point though, Sarah. Like, it comes back almost a broader presentation technique, right? And I think if we even approach that topic of questions, I'm on the fence of I'm happy to have that interaction on the way through. I think the key bit, as you rightly say, is making sure that you're staying on track with your timings and staying on track with overall telling your story, because there are points you want to land, there's a story you want to tell, and it can sometimes be a bit difficult and awkward, right? Where you have to almost say, that's a great question, we'll take it later, just so you can kind of park it, because you don't want the session to be railroaded and disrupted. And it's a delicate balancing act.
It is for sure. And I'm also going to air a fairly distinct opinion that I have, and I'm sure that I will get flack for it. I am of the opinion that there is absolutely zero excuse for not keeping to your time. If you have 45 minutes, you're doing 45 minutes. You're not doing 46, and by God, you're not doing 50.
Yep.
So many times I've come on after people that cannot stick to their slots.
Yep.
It messes everything up, and that's not cool. So just don't.
I agree.
I'll get off my soapbox now.
And I think John's making a good point about some demos as well, the complexity or what you're actually demoing, because often I demo Azure Migrate. And if you're not familiar with that tool, it's a tool that kind of helps you move your servers from on-prem to Azure. Now, if you try and replicate your servers, sometimes it can take an hour, sometimes it can take 24 or 48 hours. And no one's session is 48 hours long. So everybody appreciates when I record that and speed that up and cut out all that replication time, right? And I don't think anyone would want to sit and watch a progress bar with me for 48 hours. So I think it depends very much. Sometimes it can very much depend on what you're demoing, because there's no way I'm going to demo most of that live, right?
Yeah.
But the other week I was demoing Azure Traffic Manager. So it was great to actually run some commands, do some traffic that hitted it. That's not even a word. Hit the traffic manager. And then I could show the Azure portal live and show them where it was coming and show that kind of detail. And that was a bit fun. And that was real time. But would I necessarily, again, do that all the time? Probably not, because that was a specific use case to that exact technology that was shown live in the audience. So absolutely. One thing I wanted to ask, and someone's brought it up in here, I think Steve's mentioned it in the chat. Does live demos versus recorded demos affect the attendee if it's done right? Like, I use a lot of demos, and if you time it right, the audience might not actually know you're using a recorded demo if you've got it so fine-tuned, if you've got it so practiced. So does it actually matter to the attendee whether it's live or recorded if you do it right? If you do it wrong, it's going to matter. But what do you think, guys? Have you seen it done wrong or seen it done right, or how do you think about that?
I think for me, to jump in on that, there's almost a sense that sometimes you could almost do it too well, and then it comes across almost like this has been pre-rehearsed, this has been pre-scripted. Is this even real? Am I really seeing what, and almost peeling away the story, if that makes sense, and getting rid of some of that belief of what you're showing. And I think that's where, when we've all been there. We've all had demo fails. We've all had things go wrong, and sometimes that actually builds up the rapport with the audience and the listeners. And they're on your side because they want to see you succeed. They don't all want to see you fail. And I think that's again maybe why I have the stance I do, because sometimes it can feel like this is just going too swimmingly, perfectly well. Is this actually a real thing you're showing me, or not? And yeah, it's a really interesting one.
I've heard the exact same thing, and my first thought was, that's a stupid point. Why would I not be showing you the real stuff? And then I stepped back and realized, wait a second, this is something that I don't understand. And it turns out that you're definitely onto something here. If it is too polished, which I did not for the life of me think it could be, then it kind of is it really, is it happening, or is it just another TV chef style of things? And the guy that trained me as a speaker, his David J.P. Phillips, one of the foremost trainers, and he is adamant that everything you do is rehearsed down to a T, all the way down. Every second is rehearsed, and you know exactly what to do, when to do it. And there is this, when you learn to do that, you start kind of robotic. It becomes, well, almost stilted. Then it becomes very stilted. And then if you manage to break through that and really add your own style to it, then it becomes human again. And that is difficult. And not to make people uncomfortable or sad, but the vast majority of speakers in the tech community, in my view, they're absolutely brilliant when it comes to the tech stuff. Like, holy cow, they're good. And there are so many that could learn so much when it comes to teaching and presenting, because it is more than just being able to do cool stuff with the portal. Really need to think about, what are you trying to teach, and what is the overarching story?
It's not just about clicking
I think
buttons.
I think you're right. I've seen people show 2 or 3 slides in PowerPoint showing the points that they want to cover, maybe sharing their contact details, and then diving straight into the Azure portal and then spend the next 20 minutes clicking about. And I'll admit, I've been lost in those kind of presentations, because they've been clicking about, they've been too busy focused on what they're actually filling in to not tell the proper story. And then at the end of the session, they've not actually got enough time to actually show you what the outcome, because the service hasn't taken the same time it took when they rehearsed it, or they're used to, or they've forgotten that actually once they hit that deploy button, they go away and have a coffee and they come back and then it's there. And I'm not a fan of that kind of demo. I think you're right. There has to be some kind of purpose and story. And we're probably getting a completely different tangent. This is probably a completely other story or chat and discussion about storytelling in presentations. But I think it comes right back to your point at the start, Alexander, about demos aren't always required. It's about the value of the story that you're telling within the 10 minutes, 30 minutes, hour that you have with your audience, and giving them the most value out of that session. And I think I've heard some polarizing discussions about the whole recorded and live thing, and people said, I will walk out of a session if someone's using a recorded demo because it gives me no value. And I'm like, well, that's a bit like, surely you're cutting your nose off despite your face there, in terms of you could be missing out on an awesome presenter because you don't like recorded demos. That's a bit silly for me. I would never walk out of a session if someone was using a recorded demo, because they could be telling me something amazing and I could be missing out. So I think it's quite a polarizing topic, which I think I said at the very start.
It is for sure. I had a conversation with Jonas Rapp, who is Office and Apps MVP, I think, from Sweden, the guy that recently suffered a stroke. Now, that didn't slow him down very much, because he is coming back with a vengeance. And his stance was entirely opposite of mine. He would never touch a recording with a 10-foot pole. And he wants to go on stage and he wants to basically bomb the shit out of the presentation. He wants you to fail, because that's why he's there, in his view. He's there to provide, what was it he said? Excitement and an experience, and maybe some comic relief. But yeah, that's a different story. So that's his reason for being on stage. He wants to show things and he wants to make it cool, but not necessarily to teach a point. And again, it all depends on where you're coming from, I think.
And I think that's it, right? Is going back to the point I made earlier about it feeling almost too polished and not real. We've been there in the real world. Things go wrong. Things don't go right. And we kind of have to learn from that, right? And if I'm an attendee in a room listening to something, regardless whether it's recorded already or whether it is live, I want to hear the speaker tell that story. And part of that story in a live session might be, that didn't go well, but actually, if I encounter that thing, here's how I can now recover from it, because I saw Chris fail on stage. I saw Chris do that thing, and that sticks in my mind, not because Chris failed, but because, okay, that thing happened right there. And I think that's also an important piece, is that's part of the story, is things don't always go right, and that's okay as well.
And what is it that says that the story does not contain an element of failure? What if the thing that just bombed on stage was rehearsed and scripted?
Yeah.
Like, funnily enough, part of our build demo was a scripted failure, actually. We knew something was going to fail, and then that was just part of the storytelling of, oh, I'm a bad developer because I put bad dependencies in my code, right? But, it then took us to the next stage of the discussion. So, absolutely.
Awesome. Has your view around recorded or live demos changed since we have went to this whole virtual presenting mode from our offices? Has it made things harder? Has it made things easier? Like, have you had to go off and learn like OBS and green screen and code your Stream Decks and stuff like that to make the things that you usually had at conferences, physical conferences, just happen? What's your viewpoint on that? How has our current situation changed your opinion on this demo scenario?
Well, I can start with that one. And one unexpected thing with doing things from home and with people basically their faces on their screens is that I don't need to zoom quite as much. I do need to zoom because otherwise I'm running font size fly spec, but I don't need to zoom this enormous picture whenever I'm on stage. Sure, I went through a serious learning curve with OBS, and that is a fiendishly clever piece of software engineering. And without it, I could not have done what I do, because I need to be in view in order to convey a story. I can't just do a narrative or voiceover to a PowerPoint presentation. It doesn't work. I'm horribly boring if you're not seeing me. So OBS was a must for me. And then again, it also opened up opportunities, because suddenly I could use different kinds of techniques to add in, say, for instance, a video screen up here that shows something, and I can talk and I can point to it in a way that is much harder to do on stage. So some gain, some loss, different. I'll say that.
Chris, yourself?
Yeah. I guess I'm fortunate where, like I mentioned at the beginning, I've been doing this for however many years remotely anyway. So for me, it's not a great deal of change, the scenario that we're all in now. I've kind of built up the skills over that time to go ahead and tell that story in that way. So for me, not a big change, but I think I'm probably the odd one out in the world at the minute with remote work, etc. But I think regardless, I always do have backups. And I think that's the key bit, to go back to a point that someone mentioned in the comments earlier. If there is an Azure outage or something similar, what are you going to do at that point? That's not something you can quite recover from. And we all know, right? It's the cloud. It happens. Failures will happen at some point. It's part of it. And I think we almost need to be prepared for that, just as any other person does. We think about it from live production systems. Why are our presentations not considered live production systems from that sense, and having a backup? So, yeah.
And that's a good point. We have a responsibility as speakers to make sure that we can do our presentation, even if someone decides to step on the cable to Azure.
Yeah, and I think that's why a lot of us had recorded demos when we were doing physical conferences, because again, you never knew if the Wi-Fi was going to be good enough. I am, at things like Ignite, as much as the team did an amazing job to give us Wi-Fi, it was always horrendously slow. You couldn't even launch up like Twitter, never mind anything that had actual, you wanted to do anything with. So having your presentation stored on your laptop, local hard drive, or in several different places. I always had demos as well in case I lost a laptop, broke a laptop, Wi-Fi wasn't there, because again, people come to these events, employers give their employees time off potentially to come to these events, and the last thing they want to do is the speaker go on stage and go, well, I don't have Wi-Fi, so I can't show you what I'm going to show, because that's a massive failure. Interesting point in the comments. I don't know if either of you spotted it. Carol is saying he fell asleep during a demo because it was recorded demos are sleep inducing. Now, I personally don't think that it's the recorded part that's the sleep inducing. I'm actually going to put the blame on the presenter. It's probably going to be one of my colleagues, and I'm going to get a horrible email at some point. But I think that's the point that we're making. If you do the recorded demos right, then it should be just as entertaining, just as educational as a presenter. And I think actually in that case, I'm going to say that the presenter failed. Am I being harsh, guys, or is that maybe where you're heading as well?
I've
100%.
fallen asleep on a live presentation. Now, I didn't
hopefully
do it.
you weren't the presenter.
No, I was not.
Wow, that was a really
I
great
saw that question
presentation.
coming from a mile away. No, but yes. So I'm definitely going to pin that on the presenter. And again, I'm pretty harsh in my view of presenters. The vast majority are excellent techs. The vast majority are not really good presenters, and everybody could benefit from learning more about the art that presenting is.
Yeah, no, agreed. And I think regardless whether you're talking about the live content, the recorded content, a bit like we talked about when we went live last time, Sarah, around all of us have a story to tell, all of us have content and something to share. And I think that's the main point for us as presenters, is there's a story or something we want to tell. That live demo, that recording, is really secondary. It's reinforcing the point that we're saying and that we're talking about as a presenter. Like for me, every single time that I'm planning a talk, I will always structure it in the way, if anyone's watched one of the TED Talks on how to kind of present properly, they talk about the why, how, what. And this is exactly how Apple go and do all of their keynotes and things. They talk about why they made the product, the process they went to build it. Oh, and by the way, here's the new iPhone. This is the thing. And part of it is really subconscious, but bringing people in and buying people into the story that you're telling them and getting them on that journey, live demos or recordings is just a part of that story. Really, it's about that narrative and that story that you're telling. And I think, to your point, poor presenter. Quite harsh, but there we go.
Well, there we go. It's a tool. And like any other tool, you can use it or not use it, or you can overuse it or not. Well, then again, if C++ is your hammer, pretty much everything looks like a thumb. So,
yeah.
John's actually put an interesting comment in the chat about if you're doing a demo to a customer or having a dynamic conversation, as he said, then recorded is not the way to go. And I think we're probably all going to agree that if you're having that kind of, I want to say, sales talk or trying to talk someone through problem solving something, a recorded demo isn't going to cut it, because they are going to stop you and ask questions about why have you got that field and what about this button and what does that do and stuff like that. So I think there's always an argument for certain things will have to be live, regardless of whether you like it or not. You're going to have to do that because of the conversation that you're having. I think, is that fair to say, guys?
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, you have a different goal with that session. It's not even a normal session. It's some kind of Q&A or a demo or whatever. So yeah, I definitely say that.
Yeah, agree. I think something that I was reflecting on as we're talking, where maybe you could almost have a hybrid scenario, is you have almost a pre-prepped, here's what we're going to talk about, here's the happy path, and then questions come along and, okay, we'll take that part in maybe a Q&A or a live segment or something similar, because I, as a presenter, want to make sure I get these points across to you, but actually let's make sure we factor in time or have a bit of a slot where you've looked at the service, you've seen what we've been talking through. what do you want to know? Let's go and explore. Let's go off piste a bit. To John's point about dynamic conversations with customers as well, I think exactly as Alexander just said, those sessions are very different. They're obviously for a very specific purpose, and the types of discussions that I have, I try to make my sessions less, here's what you could have learned in the docs, here's what you could have learned on YouTube. If they've already done something and they've come along and said, I've got this problem, got no idea how to solve it, I'll actually do the reverse and get them to be the presenter at that point and say, look, you tell me through the story, you tell me the problem, let me understand your narrative, and then I can come and help you and almost pitch a narrative or a story back to you then. And I think that works really well. But of course, not for all sessions, right? That's, again, almost a type of session where it's appropriate for.
For sure.
Yeah, because that's more a one-to-one. Okay, you might have like several of your customers' employees sitting there, but that's a one-to-one conversation.
Absolutely.
If we're talking about a conference or a meetup,
Yeah.
that's a one-to-many. So you want to try and hit everybody's objective. You want to answer all their questions in your allotted time in a proper manner, in a safe kind of, storytelling way. I think
Absolutely
is probably the caveat or the niche that we have here. Carol's commenting again that he finds the videos quite jarring because people don't commentate on what they see in the screen. And I think this goes back to a point you made earlier on, Alexander, about practice. If you're using recorded demos and you practice it and you know what the next thing is coming on screen, then that should not be the experience for the attendee. So yeah, I think again, I'm going to be harsh on the presenter that Carol didn't like and fell asleep at, and I think that's a completely bad experience. I would definitely encourage you, Carol, to maybe watch one of Alexander's sessions and watch how he does it, because I've seen him do it several times now, and I definitely couldn't tell if it was a live demo or not. I obviously know it is a recorded demo, but I couldn't tell because Alexander has nailed that, to be honest. So watch the people who do it properly, Carol. I think don't watch the people who have maybe done it wrong, because you might have a different experience, I think.
And just to add to that, because I think you both know the name Sami Laiho, the Finnish madman, the security guy. I could talk for days about Sami. Sami is a dear friend of mine. And the thing is, from a technically speaking point, when it comes to the proper way of doing a session, if there is such a thing as a proper way, he is breaking all the rules. He's inventing new rules and breaking them as well. There is nothing that guy does that normal people do. And that's why he keeps winning basically everything he does, because he does not only ignore the rule book, he writes a whole new rule book, and then he goes with that. So it's not easy to find the right way to speak, but everybody has different style, and some styles work better for others. I could not do what he does in a million years. And then again, I'm pretty sure that he wouldn't touch what I do either. So
Did he not sneak in a rabbit or something at
no,
Ignite
a hedgehog.
Oh, sorry, a hedgehog.
The hedgehog was called Token.
Love that.
Yes, I remember that.
He got an email he got a phone call from Tina, the MVP lead in EMEA, that said, Sami, we need to talk. That's the only time I know that Sam has been scared.
To take us back just to that point a sec, though, that Carl made around recorded demos, and the point you made, Sarah, on almost practice, well, not almost, but practicing them in advance, the points you want to make, explaining what's going on the screen, etc. I don't think that's even just for recorded demos, right? Even for the live demos, you want to make sure that you have that story down. The one thing I absolutely hate and will completely ruin a presentation for me is when there's someone steps back and goes, oh, I didn't realize this slide was next, or something along those lines. And if you don't know the content that you're presenting, it sounds bad, but I've almost instantly lost a bit of faith in what you're telling me about now. And I think regardless, again, back to presentation techniques, which I think has come up quite a few times on this talk here, you need to know what's coming up. And even though it's part of the wider narrative, at least know the content that is coming.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things you struggle with, you have roughly 30 seconds to imprint why they should listen to you. I mean, I'm apparently on stage. Why the heck would you listen to me? I have 30 seconds to make my point, and that's why you will never hear me start with who I am. It
Yes.
is not relevant before I sink my hook into you. Then you're interested in who I am and why I'm there. But I need to have your attention for starters. So
Mhm.
that's pretty much what it is. It's a game of confidence. I need to make sure that the audience has confidence in me and going, oh, that's an interesting slide. I haven't seen that in a while. That is not confidence inspiring.
It's exactly like James Bond. What James Bond film have you seen that starts with the opening introduction, the big music number, the what film you're watching? Not a single one. Every single one starts with an action sequence, something to get you hooked in. And then it's okay, you're watching this James Bond film. And I do the exact same, not have action sequences in my presentations, although maybe I should take notes. I mean, maybe that's something we could collaborate on, Alex. So, you know,
I
maybe
think
we
so,
could do that. Yeah.
I'll collaborate with that.
Yeah, awesome. But again, you know, I never introduce myself first. It's always right. This is the topic we're talking about. This is why we're talking about. And here's not proving myself, but here's why you want to listen to me talk about it. Here's the experience that I have around this. Oh, and by the way, here's who I am. This is me. And then go into the topic. So 100% with you on that.
Yeah, basically explaining what's in it for you.
Yeah.
And in some cases, people are in the wrong session. This is not relevant for them. So why not give them an out? And I'm not saying if you're not interested in my session, get out. I'm saying if you're not interested in this session, go find something else that is more interesting to you, because we only have this much time on this earth. So there's no point in you spending it with me if you're not listening.
Yep.
Awesome. We're kind of getting to the top of the hour, but I wanted to do one last section of horror stories about things that have gone wrong for us. I think my horror story, while I give you guys both time to have a think about yours, is when I was presenting at Ignite in Florida 2 years ago. I was about to pull up my demo. It was a recorded demo, I'll be honest about that, and it didn't come up on the screen, and I started talking because I could see on my laptop. Now, this could have easily happened if it was a live demo I was doing it on the Azure portal, because whenever I'd set up my screens, I thought I checked it, but I hadn't, and all the audience were seeing was, well, it was actually a good thing because it was my branding and everybody came and asked it for stickers afterwards. But yeah, the demo was, I was blindly aware to the fact that the demo was going there until someone in the audience who I couldn't see started shouting, going, that you're not on screen. So that was one of my horror stories. And I think we've probably all got horror stories where we're just not showing the right screen, probably now more so than ever since we're at home and in control of our own production. But Alexander, what's your worst horror story or horror story?
I'm trying to figure out where to start. Now, on stage, I've had, so I always bring at least 2 computers with me, and people look at me and say, why are you lugging all that crap around? Well, I'll tell you why. Because twice I've had, the first one just blue screen and didn't want to play ball.
Yep.
So what did the second do? Well, it said, oh, I think you need updates, and I got updates. So that kind of sucks. And when it comes to doing remote presentations, I have a fairly, I think the word I'm looking for is way overcomplicated setup here, because I have a main screen, I have 2 secondary screens, I have a camera, I have this thing. And the sheer opportunity for this finger to mash the wrong button is endless. And yeah, I've let's just say, without going into details, that you might be careful with what you have showing on your secondary screen while you're presenting, and I'll let everybody fill in their own ideas. Chris.
Yes, whenever you have any back channels of discussions or anything going on, that can always be fun and nerve-wracking when you're going to share a screen. I guess the one I mentioned earlier is a fun one around being prepared almost to go live, even if you've submitted something for pre-record in advance as well. But I've talked about that one, so I won't use that one. So I think the other scenarios is the obvious ones, right? But I'm sure everyone listening in has been there, where you go ahead, you go into one of these sessions, you're going through maybe a multi-presenter session, you're relying on someone else for part of your demo, and something doesn't go quite right. And then you start getting a little nervous because, hold on, to one of the points made earlier, these more complex demos, you depend on someone else's thing. That hasn't quite gone to plan. Now you need to somehow do your pieces based upon that not going right. That's not a fun place to be in. Fortunately, all goes fine, all recovered and all good. Managed to deal with that all live, which is great, but it's not a place you want to be in when you're about to start talking. And obviously, as we've spoken about, landing your narrative and landing your points. So can be
No,
stressful.
that's a definite point. And I might add, it is surprisingly difficult to land a point in a presentation when someone in the audience either A, goes to the bathroom with their mic on, or B, which has happened to me once while presenting for the Power BI user group, started playing porn very loudly.
Oh
It
no.
does throw you off your game a bit. Fortunately, that has never happened to me on stage, and I don't think it will. But yeah, the things we learn to just roll with are legion. It is never boring to be a presenter. I'll say that.
I don't think I can follow at that point.
No,
I'm just so
that's-
stunned right now.
that's topped it.
Uh,
What I want to do is say thank you to you both for joining me. Your points of view have been great. It's been great catching up with you. Thank you to everybody that's joined us on the live stream. Appreciate the support and comments and questions. I think what we probably can take away from this session is, regardless of whether using recorded demos or live demos, practice, rehearse, get the timings right, know what your next screen is going to be, and that way you probably won't fail, because if you've rehearsed, no matter what type of demo you're doing, you will be awesome at it. So again, thank you both for joining me, and thank you to everybody that's joined us this evening.
Thank